Long before Charles Darwin ever stepped foot on the HMS Beagle, people were starting to suspect that life wasn't fixed. As they dug into the earth, they found layers of rock that told a story. In the deeper, older layers, they found fossils of bizarre creatures that no longer existed. Higher up, in the younger layers, the fossils started looking more and more like the plants and animals we see today. The message, chiseled in stone, was clear. Life had changed. Species had appeared and disappeared. The Earth was ancient, and its past was a grand biological epic. But how did this happen? What was the engine driving all this change? The world had a huge question, but it was missing the how. The stage was set for a revolutionary idea, and that idea would come from the mind of a man whose careful observations of the natural world would unlock the secret. In the mid-1800s, two brilliant naturalists, Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace, separately had the same eureka moment. They figured out the mechanism for evolution: natural selection. The idea is as elegant as it is logical, and it's built on a few simple observations. First, no two individuals are exactly alike. There's variation. Just think of a litter of puppies. Some are a bit bigger, some faster, some have thicker fur. Darwin knew that many of these traits are heritable. They get passed down from parents to kids. Second, way more offspring are born than can ever hope to survive. Resources are limited, and it's a tough world out there. This creates what Darwin called a struggle for existence, where everyone is competing to survive and reproduce. And because of all that variation, some individuals will happen to have traits that give them a tiny edge in their environment. A slightly faster rabbit is more likely to outrun a fox. A cactus that stores just a bit more water is more likely to make it through a drought. A finch with a slightly tougher beak might be able to crack a seed that others can't. These survivors, the fittest, meaning the best fit for their environment, are more likely to live long enough to have kids and pass on those helpful traits. The individuals with traits that don't help are less likely to make it. Over many, many generations, this process repeats. The helpful traits become more common, and the less helpful ones fade out. Slowly, relentlessly, the whole population changes. It becomes better adapted to its environment. Darwin called this whole process descent with modification. It's that simple. Variation, inheritance, and competition lead to change over time. That's natural selection. For Darwin, this was a powerful theory. For modern science, it's a confirmed fact, backed up by mountains of evidence from totally separate fields that all point to the same conclusion. Let's start with the fossil record. Fossils are our time machine. They don't just show us extinct creatures, they show us progression. Scientists have found thousands of transitional fossils, species that perfectly slot in between major groups. We have fossils that show whales evolving from land mammals, their back legs shrinking over millions of years. We have Archaeopteryx, a famous fossil with the feathered wings of a bird but the teeth and long tail of a reptile. The fossil record is like a detailed library of life's history. Next, comparative anatomy. This is where we see shared ancestry written right into our bodies. Look at your arm. Now, picture the flipper of a whale, the wing of a bat, and the leg of a cat. On the outside, they're completely different, built for different jobs. But if you look at the bones inside, the pattern is the same. One upper arm bone, two forearm bones, wrist bones, and finger bones. Why would a whale's flipper and your arm have the same basic layout unless you both inherited it from a common ancestor? These are called homologous structures, and they're powerful proof of a shared family tree. Then there's biogeography, the study of where life is on the globe. It shows a fascinating pattern. Species on islands are usually most similar to species on the nearest mainland. This is exactly what evolution predicts. A few individuals from the mainland colonize an island and then, cut off from their original population, they adapt to their new home and eventually become a new species. Darwin's famous finches in the Galapagos are the classic example. Their beaks adapted for different foods on different islands, but they all came from a single ancestor on the South American mainland. Finally, and maybe most powerfully, there's molecular biology. This is the evidence Darwin never could have dreamed of. We can now read the genetic code of any living thing. And when we do, we find that the code itself is universal. We can also compare DNA sequences between species to see how closely related they are. The results are incredible. Human and chimpanzee DNA, for instance, is stunningly similar because we shared a common ancestor in the relatively recent past. The family tree drawn from our genes almost perfectly matches the one drawn from fossils and anatomy. This flood of evidence is what makes evolution one of the most solid and well-supported ideas in all of science. Each piece of evidence backs up the others. But don't make the mistake of thinking evolution is just ancient history. It's happening right now, all around us. The most dramatic and frankly concerning example is the rise of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. When you take an antibiotic, it wipes out most of the bacteria. But because of random genetic mutations, a few might have a trait that lets them survive the attack. While their buddies are destroyed, these tough survivors are free to multiply. Pretty soon, you've got a whole new population of bacteria that are all resistant. The medicine stops working. That's natural selection happening on a timescale we can actually watch. We see the same thing happening with insects that develop resistance to pesticides. In North America, some bighorn sheep populations have evolved smaller horns because trophy hunters tend to target rams with the biggest ones. And on a Hawaiian island, crickets that were being stalked by a parasitic fly evolved to become silent. And later, some evolved a completely new type of song the fly couldn't hear. Humans are now one of the biggest drivers of natural selection on Earth. And other species are adapting in response, sometimes in just a few generations. So, Darwin brilliantly figured out the what, that life evolves, and the how through natural selection. But there was a giant piece of the puzzle he was missing. Inheritance. He knew traits were passed down, but he had no idea how. That answer came decades later with the science of genetics. The discovery of genes and later DNA filled that gap. We now know that random changes in the genetic code, called mutations, are the ultimate source of new traits. Most mutations don't do much, but every now and then one provides a lucky advantage. This is the raw material that the non-random process of natural selection gets to work on. The idea that Darwin and Wallace sketched out over 160 years ago has been tested, refined, and proven right beyond any reasonable doubt. It shows us our place in this story. We aren't separate from the natural world. We are a deep, fundamental part of it. All of us are branches on a single magnificent tree of life.